Hello YouTube, my name is Nero, and today we have some Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered playing some Search and Destroy, which is something that is not very common here on my YouTube channel. This first clip here is actually going to be just me playing with my friends, and then the ensuing clips are going to be from the other night when I was playing with Wildcat and Marksman during their live streams, which was definitely a lot of fun. Those guys are great to play with, but this video is going to be talking about the Footstep issue here in Modern Warfare Remastered. So what is the Footstep issue, if you guys don't know? Well, basically, the footsteps here in Modern Warfare Remastered are much different than they were back in Call of Duty 4. Footsteps in Call of Duty 4 were incredibly loud, and I don't think it was an accident that they made them much quieter here in Modern Warfare Remastered. In fact, Amos Hodge, who is basically the lead designer over at Raven Software, he did put out on Twitter just a couple of days ago, Raven is aware that the footstep sounds for Modern Warfare Remastered are not in line with Modern Warfare 1. Call it COD 4, Amos. Call it COD 4. Everyone called it COD 4 back in the day. Nobody called it Modern Warfare 1, but we are taking steps towards a solution. Now, when he says that we're taking steps towards a solution, that does not say to me they plan on making the footsteps like they were back in Call of Duty 4, but instead they're going to try and find some sort of a middle ground, because having loud footsteps in a Call of Duty game definitely creates a system of haves and have-nots. The haves are the group that plays with a gaming headset who are actively listening for footsteps in-game to give them an advantage. The have-nots are the people who maybe don't have a gaming headset and maybe listen through their television speakers, or maybe they play with music in the background, or maybe they just don't understand the importance of footsteps in a game like Call of Duty. But either way, there's definitely this system of haves and have-nots, and they're trying to make the game more accessible to the have-nots. Now, I could definitely make an entire video about why they're making Call of Duty too accessible to fans these days, but that's an entirely different subject for an entirely different video. Sound played a major role back in Call of Duty 4. I think people forget that. Like, sound was a big deal back in COD 4. If you weren't using dead silence, I could hear you coming halfway across the map, and I could tell you what surface you were running on, whether it was grass, steel, wood, concrete, or whatever. I could tell if you were on the first floor, second floor, or the third floor, and sometimes I could even tell where you plan to go based on your previous movement patterns. Now, I know it sounds like I'm being hyperbolic here, and maybe I am to an extent, but you really could hear people very easily back in Call of Duty 4. It was a big deal. World at War and Modern Warfare 2 were pretty similar to Call of Duty 4 in terms of sound design, but after the original Black Ops, sound in the Call of Duty franchise is really just all over the place. Like, you have games like Advanced Warfare, where you cannot hear this guy running around and flying through the air with his giant metal exosuit, but then you also have games like Modern Warfare 3, where if you put on Sitrep Pro, you can hear everybody, and there is no counter whatsoever, because Sitrep Pro counters dead silence. If there is going to be an all-powerful perk in the Call of Duty franchise, at least in terms of sound, it needs to be dead silence. And I think most people that like to play free-for-all, team deathmatch, and search and destroy will agree with that, because if you have a perk like Sitrep Pro, making it so people can hear you no matter what, and you cannot counter them even if you're using dead silence, it really just promotes a campy playstyle and punishes people for moving. The best way to do sound in the Call of Duty franchise, in my opinion, is to do it like they had in Call of Duty 4 originally. Make it so footsteps are easy to hear. Maybe not super easy, but make it so they're easy to hear if the person isn't using dead silence, and make them near silent if they are using dead silence. This way, dead silence is the all-powerful perk in terms of sound, and players are free to move around with the knowledge that people will most likely not be able to hear them. Now, of course, there were some freaks back in Call of Duty 4 who would play with their headsets cranked up so ridiculously high that they had to have like a bottle of aspirin next to their gaming setup because they're giving themselves headaches with how loud the game actually was, just so they could hear through dead silence. But those people are crazy. That's no way to play, and I don't really think that'd be a good system for Modern Warfare Remastered. I just wish dead silence would be silent, and not having dead silence would make it so your footsteps can actually be heard. Like, that's all I want out of Modern Warfare Remastered. Now, I can definitely see the argument from the other side that says that footsteps maybe shouldn't be able to be heard whatsoever because it's an unfair advantage. I can see that. Like, I can see where people are coming from when they say that, but I would also argue that we're all really on an even playing field. I think most people these days use a gaming headset, not just for sound touring, but for their own immersion and courtesy to other people. Like, when I got my first gaming headset, it was back in World at War, and I got it because it was summer vacation, and I was staying up way too late, and I couldn't, like, I had to turn my TV down basically all the way so I wouldn't wake up all the other people in my house, because back then I was like 16 years old living at home, right? And so I got a gaming headset, and I loved it. Like, the first day I had a headset, I just fell in love with it, because it makes games so much more immersive if you're actually feeling like you're in there, and a headset really helps you do that. Like, it's not the same listening to a game through speakers, in my opinion. Not even just Call of Duty, not just for sound touring, but for games in general. Like, just a headset is the best way to play, in my opinion. And I feel as though at this day and age, in 2000 2016, the majority of people use gaming headsets. So I would definitely argue that we're all kind of on the same level playing field. But even then, like, even if you still think it's unfair to be able to hear other people's footsteps, there's a number of things you can do to counter it. Like, you could use dead silence, which was always my go-to perk back in Call of Duty 4. Like, here's the thing about the perks. Like, you have to pick your poison, really. Like, if you want to have dead silence on, you can't have steady aim. You can't have deep impact. You have to make a big choice. Like, do you want to have good hipfire, or do you want to be completely silent? Do you want to have good wall penetration on your M16, or do you want to be silent? Or do you want to be able to run further with extreme conditioning? Like, you have to basically pick what one you have to go with. And so you could use dead silence. You could crouch walk, which always makes you silent. And in fact, you can actually walk around while aiming down sights, and that will keep you silent as well. There's a number of things you can do to be quiet in Call of Duty 4, and all of those things could translate into Modern Warfare Remastered. I think it would be a good system as a whole, because Call of Duty 4 was a great game. It had a number of great skill factors. Like, you had to be somebody who knew the maps pretty well. You had to understand the spawn logic of the game and try to be able to predict spawns. You had to have good gun skill. Obviously, like, that's a big part of Call of Duty. And you also had to have good awareness. And I feel as though by making the weapons more quiet and making the footsteps pretty silent by default, that they took away a bit of the awareness skill factor here in Modern Warfare Remastered. Now, if Raven Software were to be like, hey, all right, guys, look, we don't want to make sound like it was in Call of Duty 4. That was ridiculous. We're going to work on it, but we're not going to make it like it was back in Call of Duty 4. Then I would be okay with that. Honestly, I would be okay with that, because I love Modern Warfare Remastered in its current state, but I hope they do something with the footsteps to make footsteps a little bit more loud and make it so it's a lot more like it was back in COD 4, because the mission statement of Raven Software is to make Modern Warfare Remastered as true to the original game as possible, and by changing footsteps, they're really changing a fundamental part of what made Call of Duty 4 the game that it was. So I hope they update footsteps, make them a little bit louder, and maybe they don't need to be as loud as they were in COD 4, but make them a bit louder, make them a bit easier to hear, and I think it would benefit everybody involved, especially if you're playing things like Team Deathmatch, Free-for-all, and Search and Destroy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on the Footstep issue here in Modern Warfare Remastered. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. I hope you guys all found it insightful and informative. Let me know your thoughts down there in the comment section below, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.